day 3 or part 3 of this challenge. We have already done installation in Quick Start. Now we will be learning. Now we will be learning about thinking in React. Let's get started. React, thinking in React. React can change how you think about the design you look at and the apps you build. Okay, when you build a user interface with React, you will first break it apart into pieces called components. Okay, so basically whenever you develop any application on React, your main focus is what part of an application can become a component. Always try to break your application in as many components as possible. Then you will describe the different visual state for each of your component. So once you break down each piece of your application in different components, you have to think, okay, what state changes these application will be facing. Finally, you will connect your components together so that data flows through them. Okay, once you are confirmed, okay, these are the state changes my components have to deal with, then you need to find a way, or you need to check from which component to component you are sending the data. In this tutorial, we will guide you through the thought process of building a searchable product data table with React. Awesome. Start with the mockup. Okay, so most of the time whenever you get any data for React, it is from APIs or you're from backend. Don't start with your APIs, start with your mockup. Okay, so always get a JSON mockup, a file, and just fetch data from that. The JSON API returns some data that looks like this. So suppose I am building a list, so I have a JSON array with my JSON data object with values for category, price, stock, and name. Now this is the mockup look you will get from your designer. So you have search, only show product in stock, then the list of fruits and vegetable. To implement a UI in React, you will usually follow the 5 steps. Okay. Step 1, break the UI into component hierarchy. Okay. Okay. Step 1, break the UI into component hierarchy. So we will, add this to our nodes. It's getting big and bigger. I'm gonna do it H2. Oh my god, how many ink I have added. Thinking in React. Awesome. Step 1, break the UI into component hierarchy. We start by drawing boxes around every component or subcomponent in a mockup and naming them. If you work with a designer, they may have already these components in design tools. Okay. Check in with them. Depending on the background, on your background, you can think about splitting up design into components in different ways. Programming. Use the same techniques for deciding if you want to create a new function or an object. One such technique is a single responsibility principle. Okay. That is, a component should ideally only do one thing. If it's end up growing, you should be decomposed into smaller subcomponents. Now, we have to break the UI into component hierarchy. How do you decide the components? Like what part should be a component and when to split them? First, there should be the technique should be use a single responsibility principle. A component should ideally only do one thing. Okay. How to decide component? A component should follow the single principle rule. Which means it should do only one thing. And when it starts, and then it starts, increases in complexity, just break into different groups. That is how we decide how and break the UI in component hierarchy, because they should follow a single principle rule and should only do one thing. And when it starts to having different functionality, uh, like you have a click button as well as search functionality in the same component, just break it in two. Have a click button in one functionality and the search in another one. So CSS, consider what CSS, consider what you would make a class selector for. However, components are a bit less granular. Okay, so your CSS class should follow a certain pattern. Like if it's about button, so it should always about button. So always check once your CSS class started having different names, think, okay, you need to break into other components. Okay. I'm gonna add this as well in my notes. Okay. Then third is design. Consider how would you organize the design layer. Basically what design demands and how you can break it. So this is the third point. Oh. Okay. This is not the second point, my apologies. CSS. Design. If your JSON is well structured, you'll often find that it naturally maps to the component structure of your UI. Okay, that because UI and data model often have the same information architecture, that is the same shape. Separate your UI component where each component matches one piece of the data model. Okay, so it's very interesting. So we have four things, right? Category, price, stocked, and name. So each data model can have its own component. Let's see. There are 5 components on the screen. So first they have separated the 5 component. The first component will be your filterable product table, that is the whole gray area. Then we have search bar. Search bar will have a text field for search and a checkbox. Third, we have product table. Inside the product table, it is further divided into 2 parts, product category row and product row. Okay. Filterable product table, gray, contain the entire app. Search, blue, receive the user output. Product table, display and filter the list according to the user. Product category row display or heading of each category, product row display a row of each product. If you look at product table, lavender, okay, this one, you will see that the table header containing the name and price isn't its own component. Yes, they have changed the components. This is a matter of preference, and you could go either way. For example, it is a part of a product table because it appears inside a product table list. However, if this header grows to be complex, example, if you add sorting, it would make sense to make its own product table header. Okay, here it's a very simple, just a text space, but they are saying later on, suppose I want to add a functionality here, sorting. So this product category row should have its own component because it's having its own functionality. Build a static version in React. Okay, step 2. So the step 1 was to decide your component hierarchy. Step 2 is to build the basic version in React. Step 2, build a static version in React. Now that you have your component hierarchy, it's time to implement your app. Awesome. The most straightforward approach is to build a version that renders the UI from data model without adding any interactivity. Yet, okay, it's often easier to build the static version first, then add interactivity separately. Building a static version requires a lot of typing and no thinking, but adding interactive requires a lot of thinking and not a lot of typing. Okay. So basically, you take the hard-coded value and add it to your code. It may take a lot of effort. You need to type a lot of code, but it will be very easy. So it will, you will understand how your application will work or look at least. To build a static version of your app that renders your data model, you want to build components, okay, that reuse other components and pass data using props. So you will build the component with the static data, and you want to use that component and pass the data using props. Props are a way to passing data from parent to child. We have already covered that. If you are familiar with the concept of state, do not use state at all to build the static version. Okay. State is reserved only for interactivity, that is data that changes over time. Since this is a static version of app, you don't need it. So when you build the static version, do not add state to your components. Add simple, state should only be used for interactivity. When I say interactivity, whenever user or any event happens, then you need to be working on state. Otherwise, used just a simple variable. You can either build top to down by starting building the component higher up in the hierarchy, like filterable product table, or bottom up, working from the component lower down, like product row. In the simpler example, it's easier to go from top to down. On larger product, it is easier to go from bottom to up. Okay. So how, first step, select your component hierarchy. Second step, build a static version. What is a static version of React? Basically, it should not have any interactivity yet. So how a component interact with each other? With states and props. So it should not have states and props right now. All you have to do, take a static data, add it, create your JSX, add that data to have a look of it. Okay. Then there are two ways to go for creating a component: top to down, that is create your bigger component, then inside the small parts of that component, or bottom to up, like create a small component and then add it to the bottom up part. Okay, so our step 2 is build a static version of React. Okay. So I'm sorry, this is the line. React A version that renders UI without any interactivity. This is the definition of static version. So I'm going to add this as well here. Okay. It is often easy to build a static version than interactive. So when you build a static version, is for typing, but not version. Your app rendered. State is reserved for app. So I'm going to add this line here. Reserve state for interactivity only. So don't add it in your static version of application. Okay. There are two approaches. For building. First is definitely top to bottom. Create bigger elements and then add components. Create bigger component and then add subcomponents. I'm going to add one more line, mostly for small application. Okay. Bottom to top. Create sub components and add it to bigger component. Okay. So this is how they have created. They have created product category, which has category and it's showing category. Product row, they have added product stocked and name. Product table, they have created a table here. Search bar is another such filterable product. They have added both of them. This is the data and this is the app. Awesome. If after building your component, you will have a library of reusable component that renders your data model. Because this is a static app, the component will only return JSX. The component at the top of the hierarchy, filterable product table, will take your data model as a props. Okay. This is called one-way data flow because the data flow from top level to ones at the bottom of the tree. Okay, so your props or the main data will be present in your biggest component and there it will flow. That is one-way data flow. At this point, you should not be using any state value. That's for the next step. Step 3, find the minimal but complete representation of UI state. Okay, what that means? To make UI interactive, you need to let user change the underlying data model. Absolutely. You will use state for this. Think of state as a minimal set of changing data that your app needs to remember. Okay, so our main focus should be to have the least amount of state present in our code, because it takes time and processing power for our application to manage state. The most important principle of for structuring state is to keep it dry. Do not repeat yourself. Figure out the absolute minimum representation of state of your application need and compute everything on demand. For example, if you're building a shopping list, you can store the item as an array in a state. If you want to display the number of item in the list, do not store the number of item in another state value. It should read the length of an array. Okay. Do not create unnecessary variables if you can use certain computation to obtain that data. And now think all the piece of data in this example. Original list of products, search the text user has entered, value of checkbox, filtered list of the product. Okay, before we go this quiz, let's complete this. Step 3 is find the minimal but complete representation of the UI. Add only required state to your application, to your component. Okay. That should be your only aim. Always try to avoid less state as possible. Okay. Second thing is avoid adding. Avoid adding variables which you can compute easily with other variables. Okay, this is done. Now think of all the pieces of data in this example application. The original list of product, search text the user has entered, the value of the checkbox, the filtered list of the product. Which of these are state? Identify the ones that are not. Okay, what is the criteria? Does it remain unchanged over the time? If so, it is in state. Is it passed it from parent via props? If so, it is in state. Can you compute it based on existing state or props in your component? If so, it's definitely is interstate. Awesome. So these are the criteria to select whether any variable or any piece of data you should put it as a state or not. So this is a very good criteria. I'm going to make it bold. Okay. So let's check. I have to make it bold. I want to make my text as toggle heading. No. I want to make it a third heading. Okay. How to select any variable as a state. Cool. Does it remain unchanged over the time? Is it passed from a parent via props? Oops. Okay. Can you compute it based on? So, okay. I'm gonna add a don'ts here, so you will know they should fail all these condition don'ts. Okay, let's go through one by one. Now I'm gonna again ask this. If you know the answer, you can write it in the comments whether it's right or wrong. And let's go. The original list of the product is passed as a props, so it will not be a state and it won't change. The search text by user has entered will be a state because it will change over time and cannot compute anything. The value of the checkbox will also be a state because it changed over time and cannot compute anything. The filtered list of a product will not be a state. It will be something, a functionality we will be adding later on to the original list. This means only search text and the value of the checkbox are the state. Nicely done. Deep dive. Okay, props versus state. There are two types of model data in React, props and state. Okay, so there is two way you can get data or handle data using props and state. The two are very different. Props is like an argument you pass to a function. They let a parent component pass the data to child component and customize its appearance. For example, a form can pass a color props to the button. Okay, state is like a component memory. It's it it lets a component keep a track of some information and change it in a response to interaction. For example, a button might keep a track of is whether it's hovered or not. Okay. Props and state are different, but they work together. A parent component will always keep some information in the state so that it can change it and pass it down to child component as their props. It's okay if the difference still feels easy on the first read. It takes a bit of patience for it to really stick. Okay. So basically, props is something which you get from your parent, and state is something which you own your own. A prop can be a state of your parent. So that state change will happen in your parent component and that change will go to your child component. Okay. I think step 4, identify where your state should live. Okay. After identifying your app's minimal state data, you need to identify which prop component is responsible for changing the state or own the state. Remember, React use only one-way data flow, passing data from component hierarchy to parent to child. It may not be immediately clear which it may not be immediately clear which component should own what state. This can be challenging if you're new to this concept, but you can figure it out using following steps. Okay. For each piece of state in your application, identify every component that renders something based on that state. Okay. Find their closest common parent component and component above them in all hierarchy. Decide where the state should live. First, often you can put the state directly into their component parent. So we were looking at identify where your state should live, whether it should live in the component or your parent component. So let's see. For each piece of state in your application, identify every component that renders something based on that state. Find the closest common parent component, or component above them all in hierarchy. Decide where the state should live. Often you should put the state directly into this their common parent. You can also put the state into some component above their common parent. If you can't find a component where it makes sense to own the state, create a new component solely for holding the state and add it to somewhere in the hierarchy. So, how to decide? How to decide where your state should live? Okay. So we're gonna add all these three finds. Now let's run through our strategy for this state. Identify a component that uses state. Product table needs to filter the product list based off that state. Search bar needs to display that state. Find the common parent, the first common parent component both the components share. Decide. So identify the component that uses state. Product table uses and search bar uses the list of products. Find their common parent. Filterable, product table is their common parent, so you're going to add your state there. Decide where the state lives. So we're going to put in filterable. Add the state, use hook state, and add your value. Okay, so this is the function where they have added two values. These values are being passed as a props to the search bar as well as product table. You can start seeing how your application will behave. Edit the filter value. Okay. Okay. In the sandbox, let's see what's looking like. So we have two filterable product which gets product. Here you're adding the value, giving to search bar and product table. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Now we will be getting to warning. You provided a value props to a form field without on change handle. This will render read only field. If the field should be mutable, use default value, otherwise set. Okay. So basically this is saying if I type anything, it will not work. So if I am trying to type anything on search, no value will be coming up because I have not put on change handler here. So on change handler will update the value. Since that is not there, so this will only a read value. However, you haven't added any code to respond to the user action like typing yet. This will be your final step. So first you decide your component hierarchy, second you decide your static version, third you decide your states, fourth you decide your third you decide your state, fourth we did work on fourth, right? Fourth was to identify where your state should live. Okay, so this is basically fourth. Okay. prepare your state should live. So we can do it. Okay. Once that is done, fifth is to add an inverse data flow. That is, from child to parent, we are going to do something that can be done only using events. Currently, your app renders correctly with props and state flowing down the hierarchy, but to change the state according to the user input, you need to support data flowing the other way. The form component deep in the hierarchy need to update the state in filterable product table. React makes this data flow explicit, but it requires a little more typing than two-way data binding. If you try to type or check the box in example above, you will see the React ignores your input. So basically, if you try to type anything on this text box, it won't work. If you try to check if you set the value props to the input to always be equal to filter state, passing. Since filter state is never set, the input is changed. If you want to make it so whenever the user changes from the input, the state update to reflect those changes, the state is owned by filterable product table. So only it can call set filter to let search var you need to pass. Make it so whenever the user changes from input to reflect those changes, the state is owned by. So you need to add something called on change, and on change it will send the value to the target. So you can learn all about handling events, updating and adding interactivity that we will going to see. Where we go from here, this is a very brief introduction. How do you think about building components application there? You can start a React project right now in detail.